Welcome back to The Word is Given. Today we're going to continue our journey through the Gospel of Mark. Our passage is Mark 1:16 through 20. It's a short story. In fact, it takes a minute or two to read. But hidden within those few verses is a question that has challenged people for centuries. How could ordinary fishermen simply leave everything and follow Jesus? Mark tells us that Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee. He saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake because they were fishermen. Then Jesus said, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." Mark says, at once they left their nets and followed him. A little farther down the shore, Jesus saw James and John with their father, Zebedee. They were mending their nets in a boat. Jesus called them as well, and they left their father, the hired men, in the boat and followed him. Now, if we're honest, that sounds almost unbelievable. Would you leave your job because someone you never met simply said, "Follow me"? Most of us wouldn't. We probably have a lot of questions first. Who are you? Where are we going? How will I support my family? What happens if this doesn't work out? Those are reasonable questions. So maybe we're looking at this story the wrong way. Maybe the miracle wasn't that they dropped their nets in an instant. Maybe something had already been happening inside them long before Jesus walked by. Maybe they had been searching. Maybe they sensed there had been something more than the life they were living. Maybe they were spiritually awake enough to recognize the truth when it stood in front of them. Sometimes a decision looks sudden on the outside, when it has actually been forming for a very long time on the inside. I think many of us may have experienced that. There comes a moment when something deep within us says, "It's time." Not because someone forces us, not because we're afraid, but because something inside finally recognizes the next step. When I read this passage, I don't see blind obedience. I see recognition. I see hearts that were already beginning to awaken. The nets are interesting. Yes, they were tools of their trade. They represented security, income, routine, identity. We all have nets. They may not be made of rope. Sometimes they're old beliefs. Sometimes they're fears. Sometimes they're expectations that no longer fit who we were becoming. Sometimes they're simply our comfort zones. Leaving our nets doesn't always mean leaving our jobs. Sometimes it means leaving behind a way of thinking that has kept us from growing. Sometimes it means trusting that life is inviting us into something bigger than we imagined. One detail has always stood out to me. Mark specifically mentions Zebedee. James and John left their father in the boat. That's an unusual detail. Why mention him at all? Maybe Mark wanted us to understand that following a deeper calling sometimes changes relationships. Not because we stop loving people, but because growth often requires movement. The invitation of Jesus wasn't simply, "Come walk with me." It was an invitation into a completely different way of seeing life. To me, that's what repentance, metanoia, is really about. Not fear, not shame, not guilt. It's waking up. It's allowing your mind and your heart to open to a larger reality. It's becoming willing to leave behind whatever keeps you asleep. Maybe Jesus is still asking that same question today. Not just to fishermen, but to every one of us. What are the nets you're still holding on to? And what might become possible? If you had the courage to let them go, thank you for spending these few minutes with me. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and above all, keep waking up.